Yeah, so we can maybe get started. It's about 5:37. I didn't know if a couple more people might show up, but we could get started and they can catch up. I want to, so I'll remember your question, because if I forget it, I want you to ask it again so that I can make sure to answer it, because I do have an opinion about that. I actually wanted to start by apologizing for the somewhat formal setup. The last time I did this, it was like a table. We sat around it. It was just a conversation. I was told that that's like a cameraman's worst nightmare. So hence this setup, the microphone, so that the hope is, and I appreciate you all humoring me with this, but it's been, there was a substantial amount of sort of concern when I went to the select board and brought this to them that not enough people would know about this when it showed up on the ballot and what it meant, and that would result in potentially some backlash on the board for even putting it on the ballot at all. And so that this is, I'm trying really hard to respect that, and part of that means, like, I've been doing television interviews, and the TV folks are here in part so that we can potentially rebroadcast this later and help educate folks who couldn't make it to this meeting, who didn't know that the meeting was happening, that sort of thing. So I appreciate your patience with that. I wanted to also just sort of say a couple words quickly about who I am and how I got involved in this, and then really basic what this vote is about, and then most of the rest of the time can just be about answering folks' questions. So my name is NEK Anzalone. I live here with my daughter and my wife upstairs. This venue is called 142 Eastern. We do a bunch of sort of community-based events that typically try to promote and support local artists and other types of creative economy workers. We do a lot of work with Sarah Spence. She's a chef in the area, so she'll often do, welcome, have a seat. She'll often do sort of custom meals for whatever the event is that we're doing. So, for example, last week we had a sort of a Cape Breton party, and Sarah made a bunch of sort of traditional Cape Breton food, actually. We had oysters and a bunch of other stuff, that fish-based stuff that is common in Cape Breton, and a dance party. It was a lot of fun. So we do that type of thing in this space. During the day, I also work full-time. I'm a remote worker. I work for an educational nonprofit. I manage a software team. The nonprofit's called the Achievement Network. We're nationally based, so we're nationally distributed. We figured out a long time ago that in order to attract top talent as a nonprofit, one of the things that we could do was learn how to be a distributed organization. I've been with them for like 10 years now. It's a great organization. I love working for them. I used to live in Reigate right down the street from Gil and Cynthia Stile, and my internet was so bad that I was actually really concerned about being able to effectively continue performing my job. Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons why we moved to St. Johnsbury, where I now benefit from cable, which is a much better internet connection than I was getting from Consolidated, which was a DSL connection. I've been looking for a long time to try to do something like this. There is still an effort in Newbury, Vermont called Renewbury that has taken like a slightly different approach to addressing the same problem, which is underserved addresses in terms of decent internet service in this area. Last spring, I learned about the Northeast Kingdom Broadband Working Group. I believe it was started by Catherine Sims and Evan Carlson. Catherine Sims is the director of the Northeast Kingdom Collaborative. They do lots of great stuff. Go check out their website. Evan Carlson is the founder of the Due North co-working space in Lyndonville. And I got really excited about this effort for two reasons. The first of which is that most of the folks who've been involved in this working group, there's a consensus about needing to have a community-based solution, because corporate-based solutions have not been working demonstratively for the last 10, 20 years. And the other thing that got me really excited about this was the legislation that they were looking to take advantage of, which eliminates one of the sort of biggest obstacles that I think has been preventing more communities from doing this, which is the risk factor associated with trying to pull together this sort of an effort. What I mean by that is that the legislation that we're taking advantage of to form this entity, this consolidated union district, specifically articulates that the financial risk cannot be directly tied back to taxpayers. So that means if this district takes out a loan, if something goes wrong and it goes belly up, there is no way legally for the bondholder to go after the taxpayer. The CUD district has to present enough of a business case that the risk is acceptable based on the assets and the profile of and the business case of the potential income. And to me, that's huge. That is one of the first things that pretty much everybody, when I first started talking about this, raised was, well, what is it going to cost? What is the taxpayer going to have to pay? I don't want my taxes to go up anymore. This literally has nothing to do with that. Legally cannot be tied back to the taxpayer directly. The way that it is funded is through grants, through loans that where the risk is distributed across the entire state, if it's a state-based bond, or federally, if it's a federal bond. And then through subscriptions, through people paying for the service that the district would be providing. So that's the vision of this effort. The other thing that I really want to articulate before I start answering questions is it's really important to me to manage people's expectations. This is not something where, like, you're going to vote yes on this and you're going to get broadband next year. This is a long-term investment in our community, and we're looking at like 3 to 5 year rollout before anybody sees improved internet. Potentially longer for some communities. We can't do the whole Northeast Kingdom at once. I mean, it will probably take somewhere in the order of 10 years before the entire Northeast Kingdom could be built out with the infrastructure that we're talking about. So this is not a fly-by-night, overnight solution. This is a long-term investment. And as such, I just want to make sure that that's really clear. We're at the very, very early stages of this, where we now have some exciting legislation we can take advantage of. The first step is forming that entity, the CUD entity, and their job would be to make the decisions about where do we build out first? What's the right business plan? How do we do this responsibly? What's important to the community? Those are not decisions that anybody who's currently sitting on the working group feels comfortable making on behalf of the community. Our effort has been to try to get to this point where we can form this entity and do some research to put in front of the board that would represent all of the towns that are involved, so that they can make decisions based on their understanding of what their town needs and their understanding of what the greater Northeast Kingdom community needs.
How's the research funded?
How is the research funded? So there are specific grants that we have and already taken advantage of, and that more that we can take advantage of to do feasibility studies. So I know Evan has already done one feasibility study that was local to the Linden area, which indicated very promising, sort of a very promising picture of what that could look like. The other thing that I would say that's relevant to that actually is one of the reasons why it was promising is, while the margins, as you all were talking, like I was hearing all these anecdotes, which are very commonplace at this point in terms of the conversations that I've been having, the anecdotes about places like Spectrum and Consolidated saying it doesn't make enough sense for us. There's only 4 residents on this road. We can't justify it. The reason that you are hearing that is because the margins aren't big. It's not because the margins don't exist. So the feasibility study that we did in Linden indicates that the margins are there. There's enough for this to be a profitable endeavor. It's just not something you're not going to get rich. And if they have to make a decision between prioritizing our area where the margins are small and building out further in an area like Burlington or Barrie, where like the margins are bigger because there just is more people, it's not really even much of a choice. Like, you don't have to, I mean, like, I don't blame them. They're beholden to their bottom line. That's their purpose. So it's not much of a mystery why the Northeast Kingdom in particular has sort of suffered with that strategy, where 16 of the 20 worst served towns are located in the Northeast Kingdom.
So is our vote to join this?
That is correct. So every town, the first step is for like what's on the ballot right now for St. Johnsbury and all the other towns that are on this map, which is on the back of this handout. There's 27 towns that have put this on the ballot. So every one of these towns is voting just on whether or not to join the CUD. And that doesn't actually mean that if you don't join it, you won't get service. That's not the point. The point is, if you join the CUD, then your town appoints somebody who would then sit on the board of the CUD and be aware of and informing the strategy of how the CUD would be operating. That's the stage that we're at. It's really very, very, very early in the process.
Is the CUD also attempting to look at rural development funds from federal grants?
Yes, there's a mess of, so we did, this is, I only have one copy of this, so I can't give a ton of them out, but this is one of the pre-feasibility studies that were done, and there are like pages of different potential funding opportunities that the CUD could take advantage of, some of which are actually coming up right in the spring. So the hope is that we can, we're gonna like try to hit the ground running once the CUD is formed. The first initial stages are, we form the CUD, we figure out which towns have voted to decide to join. Those towns then have to appoint a representative. I believe the select board is typically the people who have to appoint that person, and they need to meet in order to do that, which means realistically speaking, we're looking at the end of April before we have an understanding of who's actually going to be physically sitting on the board of the CUD. At that point, we would generate the first meeting of the CUD board, and the first action item would be establishing bylaws and governance rules, sort of things that would be required for the CUD to operate effectively and functionally.
And the working group is thinking about those beforehand. They're going to recommend things?
Yes, we have, yes, there are some unique challenges to our area. So like, we have the advantage that we're not the first folks who have done this. So the example that I was citing earlier of EC Fiber, they already have it established. They paid somebody, like a lawyer, to come up with bylaws. They have established those, and they're a nonprofit. So they're like, great, like, let's work. Like, they gave us their copies of their bylaws to sort of start with. One challenge that we have, and this was actually the purpose of this pre-feasibility study, was to help us understand, does it make sense to have a single CUD or multiple CUDs? Ultimately, the recommendation from the folks that did the study was to form a single CUD, both because we think it will be less expensive and therefore more financially viable for us to have a single operational structure instead of two, and because two CUD entities would then be potentially competing for funding. Here's the problem. There's 50 towns in the Northeast Kingdom. So that's not what EC Fiber or any other CUD looks like. So we need to do some thinking about what does effective board management or board operation look like with a 50-member board. That's awkward. We think it will probably be something like there will be an executive committee or something like that, but that needs to be ironed out, and that would also, I hope, be among the initial things that the CD board would be looking at.
How big was EC?
EC Fiber, I believe that's a great question, and I apologize for not knowing. I think it's around 26 towns. I mean, we're okay right now, right? Initially, we're okay. The problem is we don't want to like let it go too long because, you know, towns, in theory, like the way that the legislation works, any town who doesn't join this year could join next year with just a select board vote. Yeah. The initial joining has to happen via the, with the initial establishment, it has to happen through the March vote.
Is the voting on Tuesday binding, or is it just a sense of the town and the select board still has to vote.
My understanding is that it's binding.
Oh, okay.
However, we can pull back out. So like if we don't like it, if we don't want to be a member of the CED anymore, it's not irreversible, but you have to remove yourself the same way that you entered, which means that St. Johnsbury would need to put it on the March ballot that they wanted to leave the CUD in order to leave the CUD.
Oh, we don't want to leave it. We just want internet.
How's it gonna be worded? Because depending on.
The question on the
wording,
ballot?
Yeah, people don't know.
So
vote
this is
yes or
actually
no.
on, I think it's on the handout. Let me double check. It should have been if we didn't put it on there. I can,
Yeah, I don't
it's
know.
annoying.
The question's not there.
Well, it just says vote yes, so
Yep.
that's.
Yeah. So the wording is something along the lines of, shall the town of St. Johnsbury enter into a communications union district, CUD, to be known as the Northeast Kingdom Community Broadband under the provisions of the blah, blah, blah. I don't even know how to pronounce that.
Are you gonna get this on like VPR and everybody knows about it?
So I've done I did an interview yesterday with Kingdom Access Television with Susan Cherry. That's, I think, happening, might be going on tomorrow, potentially. I think somebody from WCAX was also in touch with us about doing an in-person interview. We've been doing a lot of letters to the editor. Somebody mentioned that they saw Catherine Sims' letter in the VT Digger.
It's been in the digger. It's about the record.
I know Scott Campbell wrote something for the record a while ago. If you have cycles to do any of that, or take some like leaflets and hand them out at White's Market, I mean, the more the better. I mean, we're definitely would be eager to get help getting the word out. I know that it is Article 28, so it's, in fact, actually, you know what, I have the, hold on a second, I've got copies of the, yeah, it's here, I see it.
Everybody would say that.
Yes.
One of our neighbors doesn't have internet at all, and that's really nothing.
Yeah.
Well,
By satellite.
So, yeah, it's Article 28. I have a couple of copies, actually, of the town report, if anybody needs them. Shall the voters of the town of St. Johnsbury enter into communications union district to be known as the Northeast Kingdom Community Broadband under the provision of blah, blah, blah. Yes?
Why would somebody be opposed to this?
That's a great question. I have a hard time answering that question because I don't think there's a rational explanation for being opposed to it. Yeah, I mean, I just don't have a good answer. So I've only been living in St. Johnsbury for a year and a half. It seems to me, I get the impression that some folks in St. Johnsbury have felt burned by there's maybe some tension about services that are provided here that make taxes higher. I honestly don't know the details about that. That could be where some of the resistance is coming. I think there's also a pretty natural sort of fear of change that all of us have, or nervousness about they say, I have received a lot of feedback they say it's no risk, but nothing's no risk. So they don't believe it. And it's not no risk, it's just that the risk is, it's on the
organization.
the person that's and the person that's issuing the bond if we end up getting a loan.
Yeah.
It's a feasibility study, more or less, at this point.
At this point, it's feasibility. I'll get you 1 second. Let me just finish answering this question. It's a feasibility study, hopefully very quickly. I'd really like us to move faster and get to a place where we're doing not just a feasibility study, but a true business plan. Yeah. The pre-feasibility study that we did has sort of if you read it, all of this stuff is online, actually. It's a community effort, right? So we have a Google Drive folder with most of this stuff where you can just go check it out if you're interested and you have the time. The pre-feasibility study sort of threw together it could look like this, but there's nothing. I mean,
Yeah.
The point of that was to demonstrate that one pretty massive advantage that we do actually have is we actually have access to assets here that other communities may not have. So, for example,
Is there fiber?
there's a bunch of dark fiber that somebody got funding to lay down in I don't know
Road.
exactly where it is.
On the road.
Pull it to
They
the
just
rest of the
won't actually pull it to the houses.
It's not just, though, there's the dark fiber, there's also opportunities for partnerships. So for example, we're in conversations with the electric companies from the area, many of which are run by nonprofits who have a vested interest in thinking about, like, how could they help continue to think about expanding their services to their communities. None of that is set in stone, but it's encouraging in the sense that there are real assets that we have that many other communities may not have. I want to make sure I get to the question from the gentleman in the back.
Yeah, you sort of semi-answered it. How are you going to, what are your plans for speeds?
Great question.
Things like that, you know, the build out? I mean,
Yep. So
fiber optic is not exactly cheap to,
it's not cheap. It costs something like $20,000, $25,000 a mile to lay fiber, depending on whether or not you're talking about middle mile or end mile. That said, the conversations that we've had with EC Fiber have been encouraging. If we are able to secure funding and get a solid plan in place, it is not unreasonable to think that if we could be targeting like 250 miles a year, which is a lot. I think it is too early, though. I don't want to lie to you. It is way too early to be making commitments in terms of timeline. So like I said, like, we're looking at 3 years before really any build out happens, because first we want to make sure we have a solid plan in place.
I understand that. I'm talking about megabits.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
Yep.
And also, how are you going to buy your, how are you going to work your IP addresses?
That, I think, is the second question is harder to answer, because I think it depends a lot on the hardware that we use, which I think is further down the line. That,
Hardware also dictates speed.
well, we're likely to use fiber. At this point, the research indicates that fiber is the most likely solution.
Right.
Which makes me want to say, like, if you're asking whether or not you're going to get a static IP address.
No, that I wouldn't necessarily expect. I just wanted to know, for example, if Icon has discounts, let's say, for nonprofits.
That is a great question that I don't have the answer to. The question that I can do a better job of answering is, like, what is the expectation of speeds served?
Okay.
Our hope, our expectation is that we could, that we should be able to target similar speeds to what EC Fiber is targeting for a similar price point range. That's our goalpost, right? Whether or not we're able to reach it is another thing. You should check out their pricing page, but basically what that means is we'd like to be able to say that we're delivering 100 megabits per second symmetrical service to every E911 address in the Northeast Kingdom. That's the goal.
Symmetrical,
Yes, sir.
not asymmetrical.
That's correct.
So you brought up E911. How is our public safety actually communicating in the area? Are they using any, like, FirstNet? Are they going to be part of that?
That's a great question. I don't have a lot of the details on that. I do know that we've had conversations which have given us the impression that there are potential partnership opportunities there to increase or improve the coverage of 911 services. There's also potential opportunities for things like aging in place services, right? I mean, think about if you're in a rural area and you would like to have services where you're able to have home care, but you want to be able to have, you know, emergent access to that sort of like emergency type care, and or care that might involve just sort of like video conferencing or that type of thing. There's exciting opportunities, I think, for partnership there to sort of improve the quality of life for folks in this area.
Yeah, wouldn't that just negate your VT, what is it, VT, whatever it is, look at for 100 megabits?
No, because the intent is to overbuild. So like,
Oh, okay.
while we would like to, we would expect to be able to provide that level of service at a reasonable price point. I mean, if you look at EC Fiber's page, they actually offer 700 megabits per second if you want to pay for it. And so, I mean, the way that fiber works, you're essentially getting, the infrastructure that needs to be laid is way in excess of 100 megabits per second for most residences, unless there's some sort of an extreme situation.
Oh, okay, thank you.
If you're investing in something for 3 to 10 years,
Yes.
all right, what kind of changes will take place in how you build these things?
Yep, that's a great
Will
question.
it be out of date before it's implemented?
I mean, it's a great question. It is something that folks raise a lot. At this point, I don't have a crystal ball. Like, I'm not going to sit here and like guarantee you that somebody's not going to come up with some, that whatever Elon Musk is, the low satellite thing that he's planning. Personally, I'm not really interested in doing that, but maybe it works and maybe it becomes available and it makes us obsolete. I don't know. Like, I can't guarantee that won't happen. What are we going to, like, but if we're going to start now, we need to think about doing something. I have a really hard time believing that if the effort is financially viable, that this infrastructure is going to go unused.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally, I just think that the fiber is going to be more reliable and a better quality of service than other options that are currently available, or even many of the future options that people are talking about. Can I guarantee that? No. I will say, like, again, I would point back to the...
Snow and rain gets in the way of anything that isn't a wire.
Yeah.
I think that's the simple Northeast Kingdom answer.
It's true, but let's take the worst case scenario. Let's imagine for a second that somebody does come along with some like smart new technology that makes fiber like at least a lower return on investment, right? Like it would be cheaper to do something else. The worst case scenario is this effort doesn't work that well. The infrastructure is there, but it's failed because we now have something that's better. So that's not actually a bad outcome, and I'm like, then we still have something that's better. And in the meantime, we were giving ourselves some insurance that we weren't just going to like hope and pray that somebody's going to come along and save us, which we've been doing for the last 20 years and has not worked at all.
Right.
Right. Well, how can we help you get the word out?
Yeah, sign up. Yeah, talk to me afterwards. Take some flyers. I have a sign-up sheet actually on my computer, which is closed right now, but would love for folks to hand out flyers. Talk to your neighbors, folks that aren't on your road even, if you know folks that are from across town. Just make sure people understand what this vote is and is not.
Right. It's education at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our road is here.
It's awesome. I love it.
Take another road then.
I apologize for too many questions.
No, it's fine. It's great.
Certainly for being late, you may have covered it. But if you had cable today, I don't know, understand any of the numbers here.
Yep.
But if you had cable today,
Yes.
how much of an improvement would it be?
Significant. I have cable right now. I'm paying, I think, $90 a month for, I think it's a 90 megabit per second download, 10 megabit per second upload. So one thing you'll notice right away is that it's not symmetric, meaning my upload speeds are not as good as my download speeds. That is pervasive throughout the entire market that currently exists. Unless you get something like fiber, you're not going to get a symmetric connection. Now, many people may not care about that. Personally, I do, but that's an individual level thing.
Well, it's a work level thing.
Potentially.
You don't need upload if you're not working.
Right. So on an individual level basis,
Upload matters to
your
people that are
use,
trying to.
which is why they don't offer it typically.
Right. But the kingdom needs people to be able to work.
To do both. I personally agree. Again, I would actually say, like, this isn't, I can't guarantee that the offering of the Northeast Kingdom Broadband CUD is going to look exactly like this, but I would encourage you to look at the pricing page for EC Fiber, which is what we're targeting, and I think you will agree if you look at that and compare it to what is available to you now, that it is a better value. It is you get more for less money with what they are offering than anything that is currently available, in addition to which you're getting an entity, an organization that is committing to building out to everybody that it can, not just the sort of the town centers which are most profitable.
Is it really the cost for like cable companies, internet companies, to set up, so the initial investment, and once that has been built, the margins are
Better. That's correct. I mean, $25,000 a mile is a lot of cake to lay out for infrastructure before you're getting any money for it.
So let's say that the CUD is up and running and
Yes.
has laid all this line, got all these people. What is the possibility of being bought out by Spectrum or Comcast? I mean, what would it take for them to come in and say, aha, they have built, we now have the infrastructure.
Yep.
Let's come in and raise the profit.
The infrastructure belongs to the CUD. So they're not going to do anything that we don't allow them to do, and then that becomes a community-based decision. Yeah. Now, I have a personal bias there of not ever wanting something like that to happen, but it's not about me. I mean, ultimately, it's about the community. So, I can imagine a world where, because it's not the only expense, there's a headache involved with providing a service. That costs money, that takes the maintenance, like all of those things are difficult to provide and to provide well. There is some value with a larger organization that has that infrastructure and manpower in place. It's possible at some point that we might want to engage in a public-private partnership. I don't think that we should throw that out the window and not consider it at all. I think the intent of this effort, though, is pretty clearly to put the community in the driver's seat around what needs to happen, right? It puts us, I mean, it's a union district. It's sort of like a union. It gives us some clout. It allows us to be like, look, we're a block of people, and we're not going to put up with you just serving the people who are right downtown. We want equitable service for all of our residents, even if even if it doesn't provide a huge profit margin for you.
But, so in other words, like, again, theoretical.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing is that the board would have to approve this.
That's correct.
So let's just say Linden wants to sell out to Comcast because they see there's
no individual town owns any of the infrastructure. So, for example, as St. Johnsbury, if we decide to leave the CUD, the infrastructure goes with the entity. The entity owns the infrastructure unless the entity and the board that runs the entity decides to sell it.
It's just regionalizing resources.
Yes.
Which is actually a better way to ask for grants when you regionalize than you're just like one small little town.
But see, one of the risks I'm worried about is that some big, like, again, Comcast Spectrum, whatever, comes in and dangles that thing, and this thing goes out the window.
I mean, if we put the right people on the board, that won't happen. I think a bigger risk that, again, I would say is like, not the worst outcome, although it's not the outcome that I want. A bigger risk is that we start doing this and Consolidated and Spectrum are like, oh, crap, we better get our act together, and now we've got competition, and that may make it harder for us to be sustainable and effective. It's a risk. I don't know what to say. And if it happens, it happens, and we end up with more service than we had when we started this effort, and I still consider that a win, although it's not my desired outcome.
Right.
Yes, sir.
What about,
areas like way into Wheelock or Victory Bar?
Yep, it's a great question.
Those are the places that need that.
So the position right now is the mission is E911 service areas. I don't, embarrassingly can't give you a precise definition of what that means. What I can tell you is that it probably makes sense from a sustainability perspective to prioritize folks who are on roads, right? I mean, so like if you look at EC Fiber's policy, for example, again, looking to them as an example of somebody in our immediate community who has been extremely, I mean, go to their website, people give them 5 stars. I've never seen any internet service provider get 5 stars before. People love them. They've done a great job, and they've done it in a sustainable way. So if we look at them as a model of what is possible in our community, their policy is if you have a non-standard drop, which they define as being more than 400 feet from a pole that's on a road, then there's a surcharge of like $1 per foot or something in order to run that line to your house. I'm not saying that is not my decision to make. That's the board's decision to make if we're going to have a policy like that. But that's an example of like of one possibility of how we could organize things to try to prioritize the rural areas that you're talking about, but do it in a way that's financially sustainable, at least until we've gotten to the place where we're not just in the black, but we have like a solid footing, we have a reputation, and people are on board with supporting us.
So my question is, it seems to me that if you get 27 towns to say yes, or 24 or 20 or whatever you get, and you start the CUD, but it's going to be a while before all those people get together. They're really going to need a staff. I mean, it's not going to just happen because the single people from the towns
It's a big organization.
a board. It's going to need.
Yes. So you're right. I'm not sure that we are going to need or be able to afford a full-fledged staff right away, but one option is to secure grant funding to hire people that we do think are required to push the work forward. We're lucky that we have folks like Catherine Sims and Evan Carlson who are donating massive amounts of their time and resources to try to help get this effort off the ground. There's enough of us who are familiar. We also have the support of EC Fiber and folks who are connected there. Like I have personally had multiple conversations with, like Carol Volpe, for example, who is runs the ISP ValleyNet that serves EC Fiber. There's a lot of community support for this, and I'm hoping that there is enough that it can sort of push us over the hump of getting to a place where we can actually hire the staff that we need.
It seems like you'll need some volunteer in the working group to continue a bit.
Yes.
To bring the board members up to speed and to figure out what.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, that's correct. I don't. The working group isn't disbanding. No. I mean, I guess I won't speak for all of the members of the working group, but I know that Evan and myself and Catherine are all committed to seeing this succeed. So unless something drastic or surprising happened, like minimally, I think the three of us and Scott Campbell, who's a rep here in St. Jay, like there's a core group of folks who are committed to making this happen, and it's been encouraging to see the kind of support that we get. I've also seen like. Is it Ed Tester, who's at the hospital? Lots of folks who have been sort of lending their expertise and opinions to try to help make sure that this effort gets off the ground.
It's really important.
Yes, sir.
Isn't the CUD something like a co-op? Wouldn't that be called a co-op?
Well, I don't think it can be called the co-op because we're in order to take advantage of the funding and the legal protection for the taxpayers, we're explicitly using legislation that uses the language communication union district. And I think if we don't use that language, we're in trouble.
Are there particular grants you're eyeballing to get funded for this project?
Yes. I don't know which of them are the best to take advantage of personally. I know, for example, there's a federal reverse auction for underserved areas that we're looking at. There are state grants that are explicitly for feasibility and business plan studies that we are hoping to apply for, but I don't know if we can actually meet the deadline based on the timing of the March vote and then having to get the board in place, which is what I meant when I was saying, like, we want to try to hit the ground running. There's a number of other opportunities that I know less about than those two that we're also looking at. A lot of it has to do with timing and what the grant money is actually for. Yeah. We are actually getting I forgot to mention them and thank them. We are getting an enormous amount of support from NVDA down the street. So I don't know if you know David Snedeker, but he's been instrumental in helping us sort of like identify grant opportunities, figure out what help us craft our RFPs, that sort of thing. These are great questions. Thanks. I appreciate it.
What's that stand for?
Say again?
The hospital?
No, is it?
NVDA, the Northern Vermont Development Association, I think is what the acronym stands for. They're literally right down on the left-hand side. They do a lot of work helping development work in the area.
Well, and we moved here 9 months ago, and I keep hearing the big issue in the state of Vermont is the aging population, and, we need to attract.
Yes.
But in order to attract, you have to have infrastructure.
Yes.
Hospitals, you have to have, public, service.
Yes.
Internet, basic stuff.
Yes.
This is one of the big ones.
Yeah.
Well, and there's so much available to our seniors via the internet as well that I think a lot of people are missing.
Yeah.
We came from a very densely populated area that had a lot of services for people, that were seniors, and just being able to communicate, let's say via a screen like a portal, with voice command to call someone for help.
Yep.
And and when you're isolated out here and away from services, I think that type of access would be important for our seniors.
And that's that E911 that you're talking about.
Yes.
Because you have to have access, great community these people in emergency settings, they're elderly, they need help. So E911 rolls out, it has been, right?
Yep.
So we're still kind of behind the times.
Yep.
I accidentally came to this, I don't know what it's all about exactly, but all I do is use a computer.
Fair enough.
You go.
So my question is, if you want the support of communities in this area,
Yes.
is there a simplistic one-page summary of what this will do, what it is, what it'll do, what its goal is, and why it would be worth all this?
Yeah, right there. And take a couple if you want. I mean, I think what was it Bob? I'm sorry, was it Bobby? Bobby was just saying is actually one of the things that I would point to, which is if I had to name like 3 things that I think are important in terms of like why this is important for us to prioritize. One of them is availability of jobs. I mean, it's a constant sort of like litany that there's not enough jobs in this area. Remote work is one way to improve the job prospects in this area, given the fact that industry has fled. Like, we're in a post-industrial era. Like, there's, Fairbanks is not in operation anymore.
That's a big reason.
So that's a big one. Elder care and is another big reason, which they were also already articulating for us. Like, I think being able to age in place, having access to quality emergency services, this type of infrastructure enables partnerships that will increase the quality of that type of elder and emergency care, and then and quality of life.
There's also, Northeast Kingdom is a very creative.
Yes.
It's populated with a lot of creative people, and so for them to sell their products to
Yes.
small business, I know the common thing is Vermont is very anti-business, but in fact, small business and entrepreneurs, Vermont scores very high.
Yes, I agree.
So without that,
Yes.
A lot of these crafts, and entertainers and like Catamount
Yep.
and all that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And education, I mean,
Yep.
education is huge.
Yep.
And, if you have kids that don't have access to internet,
They get like,
Agreed.
Yeah.
So these are all great reasons. The third reason I was going to name was attracting people to this area. I mean, I think especially if we want, I hear a lot about how we have an aging population. No problem. Thanks for being here. I don't want to be ageist. It doesn't really bother me that the mode of our population is on the older side. On the other hand, if that is something that we care about and we're worried about our tax base, we need to do things to attract younger families, and younger families want internet. Internet is not something that, like, for my generation and older, internet is one of these things that happened in our lifetime, and it's kind of like, well, we can see the, like, yeah, it's got a lot of benefits, and you know what, I hate my cell phone, and life was so much, like, there's that dynamic for folks my age and older, and that does not exist for my daughter. That is, like, the world without internet is not a world. Like, it's not worth living in. And so not having better access to that is a mistake if we want to attract younger folks, and it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
it's a basic need if we want to
keep our town healthy.
Basic utility.
healthy.
Yes,
healthy,
I agree with that as well.
yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, like, I would love it if federally it became a utility and they put us out of business or bought us out. Like, that's a situation where I could be like, okay, great. As long as it's something that we're committing to federally doing as a utility. That's just my personal opinion. That's not the opinion of the rest of the CUD working group necessarily. But it is what it is.
It took a long time to get the Northeast Kingdom electrified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It wasn't.
And it only, if I'm not mistaken, it only happened as a result of the New Deal. So,
Yeah.
It was way after the New Deal.
Yeah. Some places it should be.
Well, imagine we could attract more tourism, we could, small businesses and also hire people.
yes,
Yeah. And the CUD would hire people too.
hopefully, yes.
This is internet only, it's not cable TV.
That's correct.
Like I have Spectrum.
Yes.
Out in the East End,
Yep.
we're covered for, I believe, all of us.
Yep.
If I want to join this, it would only be for the internet. I would still have to get cable from Spectrum, or?
If you want cable, that is probably correct. I don't think, at least at this point, I mean,
But you can get anything you
On
can get on cable.
Yeah, I know,
You
but
can
I'm.
do that.
Smart TV.
so
In 3 to 5 years, it just goes together.
I guess there's nothing that I'm aware of. There's nothing that would prevent the board from deciding
To offer cable.
to offer television. I just can't, I don't know how it works, but I have a hard time imagining that it would work. Just in terms of like licensing that content alone seems like it would be extremely messy.
What folks here have said is that cable television is becoming a dinosaur.
I mean, I think for most folks, yeah, I mean, with Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, like, there's so many streaming services that you can do a la carte, which are actually end up being cheaper because you don't have to pay for all the content that you're not watching. Most people tend to be gravitating towards that.
Better TV.
Yes.
It's already raising my hand. I'd be very supportive to the whole idea, and certainly would vote in March 3rd in favor. That isn't the issue to me.
Okay.
The issue is, if you're going to get somebody to vote, you got to know what they're voting about. And this stuff, pardon me, I don't want to insult all the experts here. Sounds like gibberish. Tell me why, in a document like this, what are the kind of things that would benefit the community? I care only about the community. I don't have any vested interest, money, or anything else. I like what I heard in this discussion. It's not exactly in here.
Okay, what are the things that you would like to see in
Well,
that
somebody
pamphlet
said,
that aren't there?
you can work from home better.
For home.
You can earn a living. That's a Northeast
That's good
Kingdom
feedback.
giant.
Yeah.
People need to learn.
This
Better
is,
for individual.
what he's saying is
business people,
missing
artists,
here
and-
Yeah, I mean-
is that a lot of people are really familiar with the internet.
Public relations have to be simple and, you know,
And
dot,
payments.
dot, these 6 things will
Doesn't
be winner.
explain to him that it's
So
going to
why
help
the
our
internet is-
community
Improve
more
jobs.
right? You know,
The 3 things that you said.
educated better.
You got all the
I see
message.
some very.
Access for the elderly for
specific-
emergency services.
And if you sat down and gave him a list of all your ideas, he would be able to get that. Somebody in town who is creative will make a nice poster and something else and get it out.
Okay, so
Then they know what they voted
The
on.
assumption,
would benefit.
the assumption of this piece of paper is that people understand that already, but that's not necessarily so.
True for,
Yeah.
for
That's good feedback. We need to
I
explain
think
it.
I think that's.
the general things like more jobs, but I think also putting very specific things, like you said about the artists, the local artists being able to sell their wares.
Artists and education and jobs and
Healthcare.
healthcare and television.
Yeah, it's good feedback. I think it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to get that turned around in this document before next Tuesday, but it's helpful to know that for future marketing, and also helpful maybe for all of you as you're talking to your community members to remember that. And I'll certainly take that away.
And write it, because we don't have time, right?
Yeah.
And we gotta get the word out.
If you have time for that, that would be awesome. I think that's amazing.
Give us a stack and we'll go, you know,
It doesn't have to be fancy.
I'll send something out on our local.
Lucy can find this.
But it's,
I know.
Yeah.
I can.
Is it too late for a letter to the editor? Before town meeting
Probably,
day?
because they typically, thanks for coming, sir.
Thank you.
And thanks for your question.
Yes, thank you for your
Tell
questions.
them, we need this.
Sorry, I used to,
Tell everybody, we need this.
Yeah. Let's spread the word.
I already have. I can't do it with a cable.
It depends, because I write plenty of letters to the.
They usually require like a week. It's,
But several, mine, I had 2 last week, and they were within 2 days. It depends, it really depends on how much space they have to fill and how many letters they have.
Okay.
I can also point out that this is a ballot thing.
Well, I did write one to get the St. J board on the ballot a few months ago, encouraging the board to have us be able to vote on this.
oh, good. Oh, I didn't see that. I'm glad
And
you
if
wrote that.
somebody
Thank you.
were at the town meeting, informational meeting on Monday night and brought up those points, there are a lot of people
Yeah,
who watch
that's a
that.
good point.
Yeah.
Yep. I can definitely make a note to do that, for sure. Yes, it's always the night before town meeting day.
Monday night.
Well, I guess some towns do it the morning of.
Yes,
But St. James.
St. James.
Who's got some cloud here?
Great feedback. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think,
Thank you for your effort.
Thank you for doing.
not at all. It's my pleasure.
I'm thinking, how can we change things? I don't know what.
Yeah, me
And every
too.
time we mentioned to our neighbors about how we wanted to change and maybe get internet and cable up to, they would just laugh. They're like, oh, yeah, people tried for years, it's never gonna happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
right.
It's been pretty discouraging.
Listen to us about
Finally
detail,
got
and then
VTEL,
like, a couple months later, we saw the VTEL truck at Billy's house. So it's like, okay, they, you know, we're trying to all help each other.
Yeah. I mean, I did a back of the napkin calculation at one point, based on information I found on the state's website. As a state, we've spent over the last like 10 plus years, something like $500 million trying to encourage places like Consolidated and Spectrum to do a better job of serving rural areas. I mean, they have technically complied with, like, they have served more residences that were marked as being underserved. So they are,
Oh, yeah, it's supposed to.
they are complying with the, but it's just like return on investment wise, especially for this area in particular, it's not working.
I mean, like they say, our house is served because we can get internet through the satellite. Well, it doesn't,
Yeah, no.
it's not served.
Satellites, yeah,
The satellite
Yeah.
is crap.
yeah. Yeah, Yeah, it is.
So I have another question. Are there
Go for it.
railroad right-of-way fiber and anything else?
So this has been fascinating educational experience for me. The location of fiber is like something out of a spy movie. People, like businesses, like locate fiber and then they protect that information with ridiculous.
It's really hard to find.
It is bizarre.
It's like you can't even figure out, they won't even tell you where the.
That's correct. I mean,
Right.
I would love to see some legislation that forced people to just make all that stuff public. It seems ridiculous to me, but. So this is actually, what is encouraging is that many of the utilities, because they're sort of nonprofit and sort of part of umbrella organizations like Velco, for example, right? They're community, locally based in many cases, not all cases. They are actually willing to share that and have shared that information with us. So if you go on the Google Drive, you can see there's a bunch of maps that we have collected from various potential partners indicating like where some of their assets are. So for example, Velco has told us that they have some assets that we know there's some dark fiber sort of in the like Craftberry that was funded by the state, right? But just nobody's using except for Kingdom Fiber that's up there. A little bit is using some of it. Another potential partner, actually, Kingdom Fiber. And then there's the Northeast. I'm spacing on the name. It's in the. There's another operator of a strip of fiber that goes sort of across the northeast, the north section of the.
I believe there's fiber on our road.
there
There was a huge fiber wheel on our road for 2 summers ago. They put it in the ground. There is fiber in a little circle on one of the poles right outside my house.
So it just terminated there. Well, we know from directly from Spectrum that it does, Spectrum stops at that house.
At the
on
white house at the hill.
On the hill.
The one that overlooks everything?
Northern Enterprises, that's what I was trying to think of. So like Northern Enterprises has like a strip of fiber up sort of in the northern section of the Northeast Kingdom.
Who has that one?
Northern Enterprises, they're a nonprofit, and so they're also another potential partner or somebody who might be willing to engage with us. So a lot of these partners are nonprofits, and that means like we aren't necessarily going to have to pay through the nose to use their infrastructure. There's also a bunch of fiber, I believe, down here owned by Velco, which is a sort of umbrella organization for some of the electrical organizations, and they have indicated they might be willing to consider a partnership as well. So there's a bunch of sort of assets in the area that could potentially be taken advantage of depending on how partnerships shake out.
Is your Google Drive linked to this website? Or
That is a great question. If it's not, it should be. If you email Catherine Sims, her email is on that sheet. She can send you a link. It is public.
What, you're in your hands?
Yeah, the pre-feasibility study is on there. And as is the feasibility study from Lindenville that I mentioned before, which happened before this one. This is the most recent one. This was done in December, I think. And like I said, the sort of purpose of this was to help us understand one or more CUDs for this area, like what was the best strategy in terms of the upcoming vote, which was the priority.
Well, it's great. It's so wonderful that you've been doing this work.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming out. I appreciate your coming out, and I appreciate the questions. I hope you vote yes, and I hope you will encourage other people.
Yes.
Other people to vote yes. Yeah, another question.
I would urge you with one of your studies, have somebody who studies this and knows something about it, to work this backwards. From the consumer to you.
Yes.
Meaning that your organization and what it does.
Yep.
And to think the way the customer would think.
Yes. So one of the
Buying, what am I investing in? Why would I want this? I already got it.
Yep.
all these questions that they ask, not what you need
Part
to do.
of any business plan would involve a take rate study, which helps us understand, like, in which areas, precisely what you were just saying, like, in which areas do we think there would be a demand for this service, so that we are maximizing, at least with the initial rollout, our ability to sort of get in the black and have assets on the books that are paying for themselves, that can then be leveraged for further loans that might help us build out in areas where the take rate isn't quite as rosy.
It's actually, now I know what I remember, we did it down in Concord, New Hampshire. They're needs studies. What's the need for this?
Yeah, so,
That starts with the consumer.
yes.
What do they need and what do they want?
Yes.
And that's critical.
Greenfield Road is a good place to start.
We have, the state has already done a gross version of what you're talking about to some degree, which is public, and you can take one of these if you want. It lists every town by county and lists the various speeds that are available in that town and what percentage of addresses are served at that speed bucket. And if you look, there's also a roll-up by county. If you look at what's available in this county, I am embarrassed. Like, in terms of the need, it's not questionable. Like, there is a need in this area. It's just a question of whether or not people are interested in purchasing that service.
And you go right back to the technical part, and I'm telling you, something different. I'm saying.
That's what the take rate study would indicate, is it involves a survey.
Why would I want that?
Yes, it involves the take rate study involves a survey.
Motorcycle.
Yep. The take rate survey involves a survey where they reach out to people and ask, is this something that you would pay for? How much would you pay for it? How satisfied are you with the service that you have? Do you know what internet service is? Like, those types of questions happen in a take rate survey.
Okay.
And that's part of what would happen in a business
I'm not
plan.
trying to take over. I know anything but.
Super. I want to respect people's time because we're over. Feel free to take off, take some. I don't have a ton of these, but take as many as you want because there's lots more down at NVDA. And I'm happy to give you my card, and you can stop by later, and I'll get you more. We have tons of them. I just didn't bring enough to hand out big chunks of them tonight.
Yeah, it stops.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure to meet everybody.